I'm just looking at you and thinking, where do I begin? The Lord told me before I came, I start there, He said He wanted to change perceptions, change mindsets this evening. And I'm so believing Him for that. I became a Christian at 18, and I grew up in a family that, I grew up in a single family. Does that make sense? Just my mom. I didn't know my dad. And it's one thing not to live with your dad. It's a completely different thing if you don't know your dad at all. And there wasn't much talk about my dad at home. I see the lady doing that, she can relate. There was no talk about him, and I asked on numerous occasions, and I was told, you know, my mom is my mom and my dad, which, as you know, that is impossible. So, anyway, one of the things that I have seen God do in my life in the last several years that has really helped me to become the woman I am today is really change my perception about Him, about people, about myself. I probably should have said that first, because as you know, you can't give away what you don't have, right? I'm a teacher, and I often say to children, can you take 4 things from 9? And they say, no. I say, if you have 4 apples, can you give away 9? They go, no. I said, well, you can't give away what you don't have. So if you don't have security, if you don't have acceptance, if you don't have the right mindset, you can't teach it, you can't give it away. And that was probably one of the first lessons I learned through numerous things that I've gone through. There's a scripture, it says, as a man thinks, so is he. And the Lord explained it to me this way. He said, my thoughts determine where I'll go.
That's right.
And he also said, my perceptions of myself will determine how far I'll go or how high I'll go. And I remember the first time he said it to me, it really, I don't know, to be honest, put the fear of God on the inside of me. I was like, what? Because my thoughts weren't very aligned at the time. And it scared me. But it also gave me a conviction. It made me realize I cannot afford to have a thought that is outside of God's thoughts for me. Does that make sense? So as I shared, I grew up not knowing my dad, and that, for a lot of people, if you've been brought up with a dad, it's very different. The effects of that simply is that you feel like an outcast. All my other friends at school had dads. I didn't have one, and I couldn't speak about one. Well, I did. I lied. But I did lie for a long time about my dad. I made up all sorts of stories, fabrications, I'm telling you. Anyway, that's another story. But, yeah, I felt like an outcast. I felt different. I found it very hard. My mother tried to be both parents. She really did. God bless her. But you know, there is a role a dad plays that even if a mom tries, I'm sorry, they can't do it. Well, my mother did. She did try very, very hard. But you know, I still grew up feeling very unloved, interestingly. I still felt like I wasn't a part of a family because I didn't have my dad. And I remember, for me, I'm just trying to listen to the Lord to hear where He wants me to go with this. I just remember for me when I felt like I had to know God as my dad. Does that make sense? Because I didn't know my dad. So I had to figure out, how am I going to get to know God? I know Him as my dad. And when I became a Christian, I fell in love with Jesus. I didn't fall in love with the Father. Do you understand? I couldn't relate to the Father. I fell in love with Jesus. I read the book of John, and as you know, John knew Jesus in such an intimate way. So the way he writes imparts that love and that tenderness he had for Jesus. So I fell in love with Jesus, and that's awesome. You need to fall in love with Jesus. But equally so, you need to fall in love with the Father. And I fell in love with the Father one day. And the Father became my Father. I just began to talk to the Father like you would talk to your dad. And I have an encounter which I want to share with you. I didn't know I was going here, but that couple of minutes I stopped. The Lord spoke to me. I had an encounter which really changed my life. It changed my perception about the Father, I think. One night, I was going through a very turbulent time in my marriage at the time. I felt very lonely. It's really awful when you're married and you feel lonely. You know, my husband is here, bless him. and I felt really lonely. And I remember one night I was going to bed and I just said, Daddy, I feel lonely. I always try to empty myself before I go to bed. I said, I feel lonely and I feel so sad. And as I said that, I fell asleep, I think, because I don't remember anything else. But it would seem to me like about 30 minutes later, I was awakened by a light that came through my roof. But when I looked up, there was no roof. There was just an open, well, I could see the sky. And I saw the light coming from the sky. And as the light came down from the sky and I looked up, I was like, oh my gosh. Now, I can't tell you if I was in a dream now or not, because it seemed to me as real as you sitting in front of me. I saw two arms came out of the sky. And as they came out of the sky, it actually, the arms elongated themselves. They got longer and longer, and they came towards me. And as they came towards me, they lifted me out of my bed and brought me out. I'm now suspended between heaven and earth. I'm actually in the arms of the Lord and between heaven and earth. And the Lord said, well, I'm going to say the Father said. The Father said, I knew this was the Father. I knew this wasn't Jesus. The Father said, I love you. I love you. I felt like it was going on forever and ever. It was wonderful. I can't explain it to you. As he said, I love you, I said, I love you. And he said, I love you, and I said, I love you. And it felt like we were just exchanging this for a while. And then I woke up. And the only thing I can remember in my room was feeling like, oh my gosh! Because I started to look around my room hoping to see the Father. And I didn't see the Father now. And, but I remember the presence of God in my room. I remember how, the only way I can say or describe it is, my room was saturated with the presence of God. It was awesome. You know, I grew up hearing things like, you're a fool, you're an idiot, you won't amount to nothing, yeah. You're a dog, you are, what do you call those blackbirds? In Jamaica they call it John Crow, you call them crows, yes? I'm trying to remember all the different ones. But you know, all these derogatory names, when you're called these names, it severs your self-esteem, it destroys your self-worth, it doesn't make you think that you're always inferior to others. And before I had that encounter, I used to cry a lot that I didn't feel loved, or I used to cry a lot and say, so-and-so don't love me, or, you know, like I was always hoping that someone would accept me. And I think that's what was even happening in my marriage at the time. I think I was hoping my husband would feel something that he can't actually feel. And God just showed himself that night. And it wasn't a long encounter. And you see, this is the thing, when you encounter God, it doesn't have to be a long encounter. It changed my life. It changed my perspective on Christine. I realized for the first time that I was valued by God. I was accepted by God. It would seem like after that encounter, I never ever cried again that people don't love me or they don't accept me, or, you know, like in an instant. You know, I've often heard this in church, you know, they say, when you encounter God, you'll never be the same. I was never the same. And that's the truth. My whole perspective on who I am changed in an instant. You know, I want to share another experience I had. I didn't know I was going to hear. A few years ago, I went to an encounter. An encounter is like when you go off, I think some churches call it retreat. Do you call it that? And I went to a retreat, and while I was there, I just felt like God was doing such a divine work in my heart. You know, I felt like He was just calling me to give more. The thing I heard during that encounter a lot was being under His authority, complete authority. And one of the nights I went on my knees and I said, Father, here and now, I give my life in service to you. Now, it's one thing to give your life, it's a completely different thing to give your life in service. And I understood what that meant. What I was actually saying was, I want to live, this is a better way. The Lord says, I want to work for you. That's what I heard. You know, I want my life to be in service to you. And during the week, I came back from the encounter, and during the week I asked the Lord a few times, what would you have me do? What do you want me to do? You know, I believe there are lots of people in this room who don't really know what their purpose is. They don't really know why they're here. The purpose is why. You have to know the why. Why are you here? You know, if you don't know the why, then, you know, you're going to go around in circles. And, you know, I had been shown a few things in my dreams in the past where, you know, I was speaking to large crowds of people on numerous occasions in dreams and stuff like that, but I hadn't experienced it in the natural. But for the first time, I said to the Lord, what would you have me do? Tell me, what do you want me to do? And during the week, first time I asked, I heard mouthpiece. That's all I heard, mouthpiece. And I thought, now, you're a very mature Christian, so you probably think, oh yeah, I know what that is. I didn't know what that was. I was thinking, okay, don't really know what that was. Second time I asked, I heard again, mouthpiece. I think I got a bit fed up, so I said, Lord, when in 3 days I understand there's a prophet coming to church, could you tell him for me what is it you would have me do? And as God would have it, a prophet turned up, and I was very expectant because I asked God. I sometimes wonder about this, not knowing my dad, because see, when I came to know God as Father, there is an expectation I have of my Father that I believe we should all have of our earthly dads anyway, but I have this of my heavenly dad. If I ask something, I expect He's going to give it to me because I'm Daddy's little girl. Yeah? So I asked for God to tell this prophet what He would like for me to do. And while we were there, as God would have it, the prophet said, who is Nelson? And my husband and I stood up, and he said, I can hear Christine. Woo! I tell you, I'll never be the same. That night when I heard my full name, you know, I don't know. You know, we sing the song, He Knows My Name. And we just, you know, yeah, He knows my, I don't even know how it goes, but you know. But, I mean, my